If you have a CPA or enrolled agent that does your taxes for you, or you're thinking about hiring a professional tax preparer to do your taxes, this episode is for you. Hey everyone, this is John Boyd, host of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. Thanks for joining us and making us a part of your week. Before we dive in, if you're finding value in our content, please give us a like. This helps us reach more listeners and share quality financial education. Next, I'd recommend visiting our website at www.modernwealth.com. Head on over to our Learning Center. It's packed with videos and articles designed to help you optimize your wealth. While you're there, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Thanks again for being with us. Now let's dive into this week's episode. How you doing, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. I'm fired up this week because as of the recording of this episode, I'm actually going to the World Series to check out the Diamondbacks. So super pumped about that. Obviously, I'm disappointed that it's not the Padres. As you guys may know, I'm a diehard Padres and Chargers fan, but I've come to terms with them breaking my heart. So again, it's going to be a ton of fun. Hope you guys have an awesome week planned out for you. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this week's episode. Today, we're talking all about explaining what CPAs, enrolled agents, and other professional tax preparers' jobs actually are and how they fit into your overall financial plan and when it makes sense to get one. A big reason why I wanted to make this episode is that there is a misconception with tax preparers that I will dive into with a moment. But before I do that, I think a little background information will help set the stage as to why this episode is really, really important. So that little bit of background information is that there is a crisis in the United States that not a lot of people know about. And that crisis is that there's actually a massive shortage of CPAs and qualified accountants that do personal income taxes. This issue was already a problem due to a lot of the individuals in this field being part of the baby boomer generation that is starting to transition to retirement. But it was also amplified by the fact that COVID happened and a lot of these individuals just decided to quit and drop out of the workforce. Add to this, a lot of people who are aspiring CPAs, they simply don't want to enter the world of personal income taxes. They feel as if there's more money and less stress in different fields of accounting. Maybe that's doing tax consulting or audit work for a large corporation, right? Whatever it may be, they just don't see the allure as other generations has for doing personal income taxes. And the reason why I'm giving you this background before we dive into the meat and potatoes of today's episode is that a lot of people tend to think that accountants have this small, intimate book of clients where they know everyone's financial situation inside and out, but that's just simply not the case, right? It is not uncommon for an accountant that just does tax preparation to have well over 400 households, sometimes much more, in their book of business. I mean, imagine that. Imagine you are the accountant in this situation and you are filing taxes for 400 families during spring. I mean, that is a lot of work. That is a ton of time. That is a lot of relying on the client themselves to communicate to you what information you need. I mean, it's a ton of work. And so again, I really want you to sit down and think about that type of dynamic for a moment. Do you think the accountant who's the tax preparer in this situation has the bandwidth to go over your pay stubs, balance sheet, right? All this information about you. Do they have the bandwidth to go over that with a fine-tooth comb and do really advanced tax planning that perhaps takes hours to save you taxes? While yes, some CPAs and enrolled agents do tax planning, the reality is that most are not hired to do tax planning. They are hired simply to do tax preparation. And so that is a big misconception that I was alluding to earlier, is that when people hire an accountant to do tax preparation, they think they're hiring someone to do not only tax preparation, but they also think they're getting someone to do tax planning as well. But tax prep and tax planning are two different concepts. Both are super important, but both are very different. So my job as a certified financial planner is to be a tax planner and then ultimately partner with our tax preparers to ensure the tax return gets done correctly for the client. So let me give you an example of that. So I had a client in 2022, they purchased an investment property and they had that property turned into a short-term rental. When I first started working with this client, part of what I do for all new clients is I take a peek at the prior year tax return. Now, when I did this, I found that the property was being depreciated over a standard 27.5 year period. This client was also in the top tax bracket. So as a tax planner and seeing this and knowing my client's current income situation and balance sheet, I presented a tax planning opportunity to them. And that opportunity was, hey, let's explore doing a cost segregation study to accelerate depreciation on that short-term rental, because short-term rentals have a tax loophole associated with them that allows you to deduct the depreciation directly against your W-2 income. And this individual had a high amount of W-2 income. So long story short, this move ended up saving them, roughly $50,000 in federal taxes. But that's only one part of the equation. From here, I needed to partner with our accountant to ensure that this strategy is actually executed on from a tax filing perspective. This type of strategy requires you to file a separate tax form to change the depreciation method on the rental property, which can be a lot of work. But that's where our tax preparer comes to save the day. And so after hearing that story, did you notice there are two separate functions at play here? There's tax planning and then there's the actual tax prep. If there's anything that I want you to get out of today's episode, it's that tax prep and tax planning are two separate concepts. And that's a huge deal because when people hire a professional to do their taxes, there is often this implied assumption that this person is not only going to just file and prepare my taxes, but they're also going to do all this advanced tax planning as well. Now, do some firms and accountants do both? Absolutely. Heck, at my firm, Modern Wealth, the fees our clients pay covers tax planning and standard tax preparation. We do in-depth tax planning and then partner with the tax preparer come tax time to ensure things get filed properly, because both are absolutely critical. Now, again, I know that's a shameless plug, but you get the idea. There are firms that exist that can do both. But getting a firm or accountant to do tax prep and tax planning at the same time is generally not the norm. And I feel like most people don't understand that a tax preparer's job isn't to do in-depth tax planning. And I feel as if most people don't understand this, and it creates a lot of frustration. Quite frankly, your tax preparer's job is not to do in-depth tax planning unless it's clearly defined. Their job is to safely and compliantly file your tax returns so that you don't run into trouble with the IRS. It is not necessarily to sit down and present, various different tax saving scenarios and get to know you in a very holistic manner. So we have spent a lot of time breaking down the difference between tax planning and tax preparation, because knowing what they are helps to understand who you need to hire. So with all that being said, when does it make sense to hire a tax planner? So this is just my opinion, right? This isn't a predefined, rule, but this is, again, just my opinion. Here are a few different situations that I believe it makes sense to hire a tax planner. Number one, if you are in your working years, you're a single individual making over $150,000 or a married couple making over $250,000. Number two, if you have rental properties. Number three, if you have a business. Number four, if you're prepping to transition to retirement in the next several years. Or number five, you are in retirement and have not drawn Social Security and have RMDs down the road that you have to deal with. If any of those apply to you, in my opinion, it makes sense to hire a tax planner to start strategically working on ways to reduce your current and future tax bill. So if any of those apply to you and you're thinking, well, shoot, I need to hire a tax planner, what type of tax professional do I even hire? So this is where you would want either a CPA or an enrolled agent that explicitly does tax planning. And you generally will know if you are paying for tax planning because usually it's charged separately. So for example, maybe you are billed for the tax return itself, but you pay a separate flat fee or an hourly fee for the tax planning element. So you'll want to ask the CPA or EA that you're working with if they offer tax planning. The other angle you could take here is hire a certified financial planner or CFP that has a tax planning focus to do that type of planning for you. Again, shameless plug here, but at Modern Wealth, that's exactly what we do. I'm a CFP with an emphasis on tax planning and asset management. If you go down this route and you want to go with a firm other than Modern Wealth, again, I won't be offended. What I would suggest is go somewhere like XY Planning Network and use their Find an Advisor directory. Here you can find a CFP with a tax planning focus. I would avoid going with larger big name firms because the CFPs at these big firms generally will say they do tax planning, but they're not even going to review your tax returns or pay stubs. Again, not the case with all big firms, but I find more often than not, that's what happens, right? They say they do tax planning and the extent of it is just looking at a Monte Carlo analysis, giving you a thumbs up, and that's about it. But I find that the firms on XY Planning Network, many of them actually do in-depth tax planning. And on top of that, their fee structures tend to be a little bit more flexible. And again, I know a lot of these firms personally. Full disclosure, I'm part of XY Planning Network. I don't receive any compensation for referring clients their way, but have a tremendous amount of respect for the planners on that platform. Now, that was all about hiring a tax planner. When does it make sense to hire a tax preparer? Someone that actually files and preps your taxes. In my opinion, there's really 3 scenarios where it makes sense to hire a pro to do it. The moment your income becomes more than just W-2 income, or if you're starting to deploy even basic tax planning strategies like a backdoor Roth, that's where I believe hiring a tax planner could be beneficial than just simply utilizing online programs. Because oftentimes, as things start to get a little bit more complex, that's where these programs tend to get it wrong, or they don't understand that maybe a separate tax form needs to be filed. A good tax preparer should be able to help mitigate some of those issues. The third scenario where it makes sense to hire a tax preparer is when it starts to take up too much of your time. Heck, I have a tax preparer that files my taxes for me, and it's because my time is money. The more time I spend building the company and taking care of my clients, the more revenue that generates for me. If I'm caught up for hours filing my taxes, that isn't really an effective utilization of my time. I would much rather delegate that out. So I would encourage you to have a similar perspective. Now, regardless of your reasons, if you end up hiring a tax preparer, do not expect just to hand them the checklist of documents that they need and them to know what the heck is going on. You or your trusted tax planner are responsible for communicating to the taxpayer what type of tax planning you've been doing throughout the year. So for example, if you did a backdoor Roth, make sure you communicate that to the tax preparer that you did a backdoor Roth, right? Otherwise, when your tax preparer gets all your tax forms, they're going to see that you made a taxable Roth conversion when it should be tax-free. Now, again, I don't blame them for filing it as taxable because nobody told them that it was a backdoor Roth, right? That's upon you or the tax planner to do that. Again, so much of the issues that I see with tax preparers, and again, I feel like tax preparers get a bad rep a lot of the time, is because no one's telling them what's going on, right? They need good communication to do their jobs effectively, right? You just handing over, your W-2s and your 1099s, right? That's not enough. You got to explain what's going on. That's why if you're looking to hire a tax professional, I would encourage you to hire a tax planner and tax preparer who are part of the same firm or are integrated together so that communication flows seamlessly between them. Because communication between the tax planner and the tax preparer needs to be on point. If you already have a tax preparer, CFP, CPA, enrolled agent, whoever it is that is filing taxes or doing tax planning, take a moment to review that relationship. What are you actually getting out of it? Are you getting in-depth tax planning, or is it more transactional? Does everybody on your financial team know what's going on? Or are people completely lost in the sauce with what's happening? Again, hopefully after today's episode, you know what to look out for when hiring a tax professional so that you can optimize your finances. As a reminder, everything on today's podcast was general education only and not deemed to be specific investment, tax, or legal advice. If you need specific guidance, you can reach out to us at www.modernwealth.com. That's modern spelled with no vowels, wealth.com. It's been a lot of fun, guys, and I'll see you next time.